Yeah, born in Fort Collins in 1949, so that dates me. You can figure out my age very closely. Um, I've been in Colorado my whole life except for 2 summers. The summer after I graduated from high school, I worked at Yellowstone. Actually, Pascatepe, which is a resort just outside of the east gate of Yellowstone. And that was a fascinating summer. Every day off I had, we were in the park. So I got to see lots of that park that most people don't get to see. Let's see. I went to Roosevelt High School, graduated in 1968 with 62 others, including my wife. But we never dated until we were in college. We went through 12 years of school together and never dated until college. So go figure. Let's see. So yeah, the summer of 1968, I worked at Pascatepe, which is a historical site. It was Buffalo Bill Cody's hunting lodge. And the last time I cruised through there, the lodge was still intact. And it's been there for well over 100 years now. And then in 1968, I enrolled in Colorado State College. And of course, that is now today University of Northern Colorado. Um, and let's see, I married my wife, Deb, on March 18, 1971. So we've been married a few years. So anyway, graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in chemistry in 1972, and I continued in 1972. That's the year that CSE became UNC. Went from the quarter system to the semester system, and so when I started on the master's degree, it was at the University of Northern Colorado. And I completed those requirements in 1972 for the master's degree. And then I enrolled at Colorado State University for the PhD program, which I completed in May of, well, actually that was I graduated in May of 1980. I gave my oral defense in December of 79. Because of that, I had to wait till the following May to do the commencement. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so this slide is the top photograph is Ross Hall. It's the science hall on UNC campus. Only the right hand, I'll point at it. The right hand portion was the only portion that was there when I was a student. They've added on to that building 3 times. And so back in the day, it was just a long rectangular building. And so that's where I spent almost all of my time in classes. I was in Ross Hall. Just to the north of Ross Hall is a big lecture, a domed lecture hall. And then the picture below that is my research advisor, Dr. M. Marlin James. He doesn't like the Mar, so he just went by M. Lynn James. He was a very leading and kind man, and I didn't have any trouble getting through the program with him. None. He accepted my thesis. Oh, by the way, I did bring some publications if you care to look at them. The purple one is the master's degree. The larger one is PhD, and then I had three papers that came from my PhD work. So the master's thesis was the kinetic study, which is how fast reactions take place. And the reaction that took place was over and done within a few milliseconds. It was very rapid. And so I had to have special equipment. I had to build it, actually. Special equipment to study that reaction. And then moving on, there we go. So when I finished at UNC, I enrolled immediately at Colorado State University. I wasn't, it may seem like I wasn't a glutton for punishment, but it turned out to be the case. So I went directly from the master's degree to a PhD. I applied to 3 schools, a University of New Mexico, CU, and CSU. And CSU made the best offer, so I went there, which was probably the best decision, second best decision of my life. Okay, actually third. First one was marrying Deb. Second one was deciding to, let me back up. I started at CSC as a PE major. Yeah, I thought, I was in sports all through high school, and so I thought I would stay as a PE major and become oh, is it getting noisy? So anyway, I thought better about that. Being a PE major was absolutely the worst decision I've ever made. And so I decided, what's the hardest thing I could do? I know, pre-med. And so I went to the pre-med advisor and he said, well, the best course is the chemistry major. And I said, okay, I'll do that. Well, that was my second best decision, was deciding to become a chemistry major. And so I focused on chemistry, and I had a biology. I was going to take a biology minor, but I decided I wanted to take a course on human genetics and not microbiology, so I could not claim biology as a minor. So anyway, moving forward now. So I decided to stay in chemistry, and I was fascinated by the whole science, and so that's why I stayed with it. And so when I transferred to CSU, this is a photograph of the main entrance to the chemistry building. Okay, and it was of course wintertime because that's snow. But that building is no longer the chemistry building. They just finished completing a new chemistry building in the last couple of years, and I don't know what they're doing with the old building. I would think that they were still keeping the labs for chemistry faculty, but I don't know. And then the photograph below is my research advisor, Dr. Gary Maciel, one of the most brilliant men I ever knew. Excuse me, give me a thing in my throat. There we go. Brilliant individual. He was a graduate of University of California, Berkeley campus, and he completed that in 1956. And then he went to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, for his PhD, which he was awarded in 1960. And then in 1961, he did his postdoctorate work with John Waugh, probably the most brilliant person I've ever known personally. And he passed away. Gary passed away in 2014. That date's kind of unusual, and I'll show you why in just a second. So, Gary was absolutely a real pleasure to work with. So this is John Waugh. And he also passed away in 2014. It's kind of a coincidence that both of these people passed away the same year. He did his PhD work at California Institute of Technology and finished in 1953. And then he became a professor of chemical physics at MIT. From 1953 to 1997. And he made major contributions to the whole field of nuclear magnetic resonance, which is what I was doing for Dr. Maciel at CSU, was nuclear magnetic resonance. And the reason why he was so important to me was he gave two lecture series at CSU. He and Gary were close friends, as you might guess. And so he gave a lecture series on density matrix theory, which is a mathematical technique that he invented because he was basically more physicist than chemist. Okay. And then he came back again the next summer and did a very interesting lecture series on NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, and equilibrium. And so in those 2 1 week periods, it was just fascinating to be with him. Got a chance to, well, the whole Gary Mayseal's whole research group got to have lunch with this guy, meet with him one-on-one. Just fascinating. And his contributions to NMR, I don't know, I counted up his publications, and it was like 500 separate publications in that time period. So, and Gary's publication list is like 200 and something, I don't know. So anyway, those two individuals were a major influence on my election to be a physical chemist. And that's what I am. I'm a physical chemist, which means it's a marriage between physics and chemistry. And I'm more chemist than physicist, but I'm still physicist also. And so this is a picture of an early NMR instrument. It's a Varian HFX 90, and I don't have a pointer. Anyway, I'll just highlight it with my hand. So this whole section right here in the center, that's the magnet. And that magnet is 2.1 Tesla, if that means anything to you guys. But the base of that magnet, this base right here, that's probably about 6-inch thick concrete. That magnet weighs 4.5 tons. Yeah, 4.5 tons. And then the console is right here. And so when I was at CSU, I was working on that instrument, not that instrument, but one just like it. Except that they had converted that instrument to be digital. So instead of using the console, we had it hooked up to a computer. And so all of the controls for the actual data accumulation were computer controlled. And it was kind of interesting. Megan may remember Taurus memory. No? That computer had Taurus memory. You might look it up. Goes way back. Anyway, on the console are the controls for the magnet. And so the controls are right, those series of knobs right there. So you have to control the quality of the magnetic field very carefully. And so every day I would spend, upwards of an hour or an hour and a half just tuning the magnetic field. And then the other consoles, well, one of them is powering the electromagnet. And the electromagnet had to be water cooled. And I don't remember which one is which. I think the box on the far left is the power supply for the magnet. Big vacuum tubes. Big vacuum tubes like that tall. So that's the basis of the instrument I used at CSU. Okay. So my PhD thesis, ionic interactions in the liquid state by multinuclear magnetic resonance. So multinuclear is a term that we use. Most NMR spectroscopists, before the advent of computer control, only looked at one nucleus. Usually it was just hydrogen nucleus or the proton. But by the time I'm doing my work, the advances in the field were such that you could look at virtually all of the elements on the periodic table. Not quite all, but most of them. And so my PhD thesis was actually broken down into 3 parts. Part 1 was a compound called sodium tetraethyl aluminum, actually tetraethyl aluminate. Okay. So in that you have sodium, which is a cation or positively charged ion, and the anion is the tetraethyl aluminate. And so you have positive and negative, so there's a tight association between those oppositely charged ions. And the principal solvent is metaxylene. Now, I know you don't know what metaxylene is. Metaxylene is a non-polar solvent, which means it can't solvate sodium ions or solvate individually the tetraethyl aluminate. So in metaxylene, the sodium ion and the aluminate ion are tightly held together. Okay, so what I did was I started adding tetrahydrofuran, which is a complexing solvent. And so the complexing solvent would go in and solvate the sodium ion. So as you were titrating with the tetraethyl aluminate, you're separating those ions like this. Sodium ion here and tetraethyl aluminum. And so that interaction then led to a number of conclusions about the ion pairing phenomenon that goes on in this compound. Now, the thing that you might be wondering is, why is that compound even soluble in metaxylene? It's because of the tetraethyls, or the ethyl groups. Those are water-hating or loving of nonpolar solvents. So the metaxylene goes after and solvates the tetraethyl aluminate. The tetraethyl aluminate then drags the sodium ion into the nonpolar matrix. And so when you add the THF, or the tetrahydrofuran, then you start to break apart that strong ion interaction. Okay, so that whole project, by the way, was initiated because when I first started to work for Dr. Maceo, he heard a talk that I gave in a seminar on gas phase ion molecule reactions. And he had an instrument called an ion cyclotron resonance. And so he got a hold of me and asked me if I'd want to do ion cyclotron resonance. And I said, sure. Problem is, back in those days, the funding for ion cyclotron resonance was pretty much given to one researcher. And so Maceo could not get government funding for the work on ICR. So I started in the project. I was doing ICR for a time, and this would be during my second year at CSU. So I approached Dr. Maceo and said, do you have an NMR project that I can do this summer? Because he had plenty of money for NMR, and I asked him if I could get an RA, or a research associate funding, and he said, yeah, I do have one. And so he led me on this path, and I started looking for candidate compounds, and that was the compound that I came up with. So by the end of that summer, I showed him the data that I had collected, and he said, oh, wow, that's a PhD research project. And sure enough, it turned out to be a PhD candidate. And so the second part is the same compound except in metaxylene, except the complexing solvent now is pyridine, and it's a nitrogen-based compound. The tetrahydrofuran is oxygen-based, and so there was a difference in the complexing solvent and the sodium ion. So that and it turned out that the data was substantially different. So that's why I kept it as a second part of my work. Then later on, I was finishing up on parts 1 and 2, and I went to a talk given by a chemist in another field, in organic chemistry, and he gave a talk on this compound, which was sodium sodium aluminum chloride, sodium chloroaluminate. I'll get the name right. Okay, which is kind of unusual. It's an ionic compound, but ionic compounds are normally thought to be very high in melting point, very high temperature melting points. But this one is molten at room temperature. It had aluminum in it, and so I asked them if I could have a sample of it, and I gave them an NMR tube, and they filled it with their sodium chloroaluminate. And the actual compound is N-butylpyridinium chloride, aluminum chloride. So what you have there is this N-butylpyridinium chloride is a huge positively charged ion. And then the chloride from the butylpyridinium chloride attaches to aluminum chloride, so it becomes aluminum and 4 chlorides. Okay? And so that's the anion. So here again, it's a case of multinuclear, or in this case, ionic interactions. It's liquid state, so that fit with what I was doing before. And I was looking at specifically the aluminum nucleus, which was easy for me to do at this time. And the first spectrum I saw of this solution, or this melt, blew me away. I did not believe what I was looking at. I can't give you the details except to say it was mind-blowing what I saw. And so the next few months, this would be the summer of 78, was spent working on this. So this is the third part of my PhD program. And so the first two were published. Oh, I don't know where those papers went, but both of those came out in the Journal of Physical Chemistry. And then the third publication was in the Journal of American Chemistry, which is a world-renowned journal. And that work that I did was pioneering. This was the first time anybody thought of trying to look at something like this with NMR. So it was pioneering. And even after 40 years, people are still citing that article. So, yeah. Well, I shouldn't say. Yeah, it was about 40 years. It was published in 1981, I believe. So, that's basically my path up through graduate school. Okay, and then following graduate school, some of you might know that for reasons that I really don't want to get into, I had a really bad taste in my mouth about academics. A good friend of mine who was a professor in inorganic chemistry had a very active research group. He was publishing, and he was not granted tenure. And I'm going, what? Well, it was all political. That's why he wasn't granted tenure, and that's why I had a bad taste. So I heard about this job at Adolf Coors Company, so I went to work at Adolf Coors Company in September of 1978 as a research chemist in the research and development portion of Coors. And while I was there, I did all kinds of different work for not so much for the brewery. I spent most of my time working on problems associated with chemicals in the aluminum can manufacturing. I did some work for the brewery, but not much. Okay, and then I did a lot of work for a porcelain company. And during this time, I was there for 15 years. And during this time, Coors they had a vice president who was very active in wanting to develop outside business, outside of selling beer. Okay. So they had a Coors Ceramics, which had been around for a while. There was a Coors Biomedical that made polymers for false teeth. They had a sports division that made golf clubs. And so there was just a number of them. And those were the companies that I was doing most of my work for. Aluminum can manufacturing, porcelain, and the other subsidiary companies. Well, in about 1990, I was up as far up in the company as I could go. And by the way, I should say that most of the work that I did would have been publishable, but I couldn't because all the data I generated was proprietary. Could not leave Coors. In fact, I had to leave all my notebooks except one. I kept one. So some of the things that I did, maybe you heard about the mouse in the can, maybe not. Some of you are probably too young. This was about 1986 or 7, something like that. This guy in Jacksonville, Florida, sued the brewery because his claim was he opened a can and there was a mouse in it. So and this is after he'd taken a couple of swigs of the beer and the tail came out. That's his claim. And so there were a number of chemists at the brewery that wanted to test his theory. So what they did was they got an aluminum can, mostly filled it with beer, put a mouse in it, sealed it. And they left it there for I don't know how long, don't remember. And so when they took the mouse out, they found that on the skin of the mouse were these little white nodules. Yeah. And they needed to know what it was. So they gave me those white nodules, and I told them exactly what it was. It was L-tryptophan. And so because of that, they knew that mouse that was in that can couldn't have been there as long as the can would have been in the market. So he didn't win his suit. So anyway, that was one. And some of the other work that I did, so I mentioned the mouse in the can. I also did some of the work that I did for the porcelain company was they were making nose cones for heat-seeking missiles. And so they would give me the nose cones and I would examine them and tell them whether or not they were in spec. Okay, so that was another kind of an interesting one. I did quite a bit of work on hops, and that I wish I could publish because the material that was in the literature was just wrong. But I had to leave that notebook. I suppose I could repeat that work now. So anyway, after about 10 years of being at Coors, most of the work that I was doing was becoming old hat. Really kind of boring and not very exciting any longer because they'd done it all pretty much. And so in this would have been late 1992. Word was coming down from the top management at Coors that they were going to start, they were shutting down many of the subsidiary companies like the biomedical and the sports paraphernalia. And so when I saw this, I'm going, oh, how long is it going to get before they get to me? So anyway, early in 1973, they announced that they were going to reduce the workforce and they wanted to get rid of the highly paid individuals. I was one. So they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It amounted to, honestly, a 15-month paid vacation. So you can imagine I jumped all over that. So then the rest of that is history here. I applied for the chemist position here the summer of '94, and I started here fall of 1994. And then I was hired primarily as a chemistry instructor, but I also started teaching physics. I had worked on a master's degree in statistics, so I was also teaching statistics. And so then in 1999, Kent Martin, who was the chair of math and science, retired, and so they promoted me into that position. And I stayed there for 15 years. And then in 20, must have been 2016 or 2017, I stepped down as the department chair. I taught 1 year as just being a chemistry instructor. And then when that was up, then I started taking classes. I took Corbett's astronomy course 1 and 2, his geology course 1 and 2. I took his anthropology course and his archaeology course. And in the archaeology course, that was spring semester 2020. So you know what happened then. And so in May of 2020, the guy that they hired to replace me decided he wanted to go back to Utah. And this is already May in the first year of the pandemic. And so they didn't even want to try to do a search. And so they asked me if I'd come back and teach a year, and I did. It was a nightmare. I hated it. And yeah, it was all online, and I hated it. And so we were going to go partially face to face the next fall. I said, I'll stay to do that. That wasn't so good. And so now we have this year. And so this is my last year. I swear to God. So that's where I'm at today. Oh, I also took Lauren McClure's Bio 111 because I had that science went way past me because, you know, I had a bunch of biology when I was an undergraduate. Any questions? Say no. No, we didn't have children. Yeah. Well, in the 2 windstorms that we had, our radio telescope, one dish was completely. These are the dishes that are on this side of McDivitt Hall. The east dish is still there, pointing straight up. Well, the first windstorm destroyed the transmission in this one. The second windstorm completely destroyed the west dish. In fact, it's laying on its like that on the roof. So because we were able to make a successful insurance claim, we had partial funding to replace it. And so those parts are now showing up. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be involved with Science Fair, Science Olympiad. We don't know what's going to happen there. So I'm going to stay active doing things around here, at least for a couple of more years. Oh, I'm not going to take care of Clifford. Yeah. Clifford is the fish that we have in the office area. It's actually Kimberly's fish. She asked me to take care of it during Christmas break, so I did. So then I got a bigger tank, and then I got a bigger tank. So Clifford is sort of my adopted tetra. No, not tetra. Beta. Yeah, tetra is 4. Beta is 2. Okay, anything else? No? Okay, then I guess I'm done.